It's a pleasure to have Dr. Taylor on staff with us, and I listened to her in Ottawa not too long ago. Some food for thought here tonight. Dr. Taylor, thank you so much for being with us, and welcome.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you. And welcome, everyone. I'm glad to be here with you. I'm appointed in the School of Leadership Studies, but at this point, I'm seconded to an Institute for Values-Based Leadership. And it's an initiative at Royal Roads that is unique in Canada, and we are generating a whole bunch of new ways to look at leadership in organization, and I'm thrilled to be involved with this because I think we're working on some areas of research and education that are pretty much breakthrough. So what we're going to look at tonight is organizations and improving the culture of organizations for people and the bottom line. We got to get this. It was going a minute ago here. We have to get all the technology focused at the right. I don't want to stand in front. Can you see this is okay? Just a sec. Sorry, this was working. There we go. I may have to, okay. We depend on organizations for, you think about today. We depend on organizations for about everything. To educate our kids, to keep us healthy and deal with us when we're not, to manage our money, to provide our utilities, heat, light, whatever, move us around and move our stuff around, and keep us safe. Just some of the things that we need organizations for. Yet, I want to ask, how many people work in quite large organizations here? Okay, many of you. Some of you work in small, say for example, under 50 people. How many people are under 50 people? Okay, so depending on the size, let me ask you if your organization is thriving. How many people believe that the organization you work in is thriving, it's doing really well, it's getting everything done? You have one back here, okay, good.
The business side of it or the culture side?
No, what is it like to work in it? What is it like to, are you getting the work done? Does it, are we being efficient and effective at what we're there to do? Yes? Okay. One of the how many people feel that there's been a change in how organizations work? Some people? Okay. I've been working at this for about 20 or 30 years, thinking about it a lot, working on it, and my observation is that we're having more and more trouble in our organizations, and when we ask why, I believe it has something to do with, if you think about 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, life was going along a bit more slowly. There was a lot less change, and what you're doing this year wasn't too terribly different than last year. Anybody else have that sense? In actual fact, we're in a different world now. We're in a different century. I can even say that Royal Roads, as a small, flexible institution, we spent a lot of time trying to catch up with the things that have changed from last year. So one of the things I'd like to think about is that we're really up against some different issues and problems. One of the things that you can find is a lot about organizational waste. You can go to Josh Freed. By the way, I will say that if you want to leave me your card or sign on a sheet, I'd be happy to send you a PDF of all this. So, so you can find these links and so on. Josh Freed does a thing about on YouTube that you might be interested in called "Why Work Doesn't Get Done at Work." And it's kind of an interesting dialogue. So there's a lot of waste that's going on. We spend a lot of time doing things without getting anything by the end of the day accomplished. We also, how many people have experienced a kind of what you might call a toxic workplace, meaning that it's difficult? Yeah, okay, so we have workplaces that are actually unhealthy for us. So there's a whole range of issues that get in the way of what we thought we were there to do. I have dedicated my life to teaching in post-secondary universities and so on, and that's what I'm there for. But some days I find, and it's not just this university, it was worse at the last university I was in because it was a lot bigger, that most of what I spent the day on had nothing to do with what my heart's desire was, right? So this is a challenge. Okay, I am very, very pleased to be working in what I'm doing because I think we're at about a place to make a quantum shift in how we can work at organizational life and make it better. Sometimes we have a sort of an unconscious acceptance saying it can't get better. I want to challenge that. If you're here thinking that tonight, I think that there certainly is, and we kind of know a lot about how to do that. We've been trying to change organizations for a long time. This guy's name was Frederick Taylor, no relation. He was a guy who changed kind of capricious organizations into a kind of machine-like. Scientific management is what he's known for. So how do you organize your organization and make it an efficient machine? Then Kurt Levine came along and started talking about how do you build teams and how do you manage change in organizations. We have a lot, including, I don't see a flip chart here, but flip charts came from Kurt Levine. Tremendous impact on organizational life. Another guy came along, the human side of enterprise. Douglas McGregor said, you know, once Frederick Taylor got the machine working, we have to remember that there are people here. So he brought, so there was a whole lot of task maintenance, task people issues that he raised out and had a huge effect. Some other folks from England started saying organizations have to have purposes, and that those purposes have to be understood by everybody in the organization, not just the guy at the top, Frederick Taylor, right? The whole field of organizational development grew up in the 60s, 70s, and we have all kinds of change management strategies and technologies that come out of that. Human resource management grew up in the 70s and 80s. It's hard to believe. 50 years ago, you say human resource, nobody would understand what you were talking about. Business process engineering, back to Frederick Taylor. Now, how do we get things working efficiently in organizations? So there's a tremendous amount thinking about, let's look at how the process works, let's make it very efficient. And finally, how many people have heard lots about employee engagement where you work? It's been a big area of focus in the last while. So you can see that there's been a number over the last century. There's been a number of ways that we've tried, and this is only just some examples, right? What we haven't taken into account, I think, is that every innovation that is implemented in an organization that doesn't fit with the organization's culture will be thrown out. Think about it. How many, and in actual fact, you know, as a result, what happens is that we begin to get cynical about organizational change, and we talk about flavor of the month. How many people have heard flavor of the month, right? In actual fact, I think it's not because of the innovations or the people promoting them, but we haven't actually thought about how they fit to organizational culture. Richard Barrett, who is now an adjunct professor in the Institute and a worldwide expert on organizational culture change and values-based leadership, talks about how our whole societies have changed hugely. So if we have here in the 1800s and pretty much up to somewhere in the early part of the 2000s, agricultural age, before the industrial age, it was how many people you employed that put out the product at the other. So it was really the size of your workforce that made you competitive, right? Whoops, wrong one. The industrial age, it began to be the quality of the product. Remember in the 50s or the 60s, we had, what's the car like? And it was assembly lines, and it was an industry. And so if you had a good product and you were getting it out the door, that made you a competitive organization. Then people got good at that, and what distinguished successful companies began to be how educated is your workforce? How smart are we at the business that we're doing? The knowledge age. How much do our people know about the business? In actual fact, we've had, in Canada, we're privileged to have had the growth of the knowledge age, and we have a very highly educated population. People like you who keep coming back to school and getting better all the time. And so that became sort of the rule of across. But what distinguishes us in the current times, and you can see these times here at the beginning of the 21st century, is how conscious are we of what we're doing in our organizations, so that when some change comes along, we know how to deal with it. How aware are we of how our culture works and what we value, and how do we adapt? So it's not so. In fact, one option I'd like you to think about is that we need a different way to think about what makes an organization successful. It's not just putting out the product, and because everybody's able to do that. So, what's culture? Now, the big problem with culture is it's like a phantom fog. I mean, you can't see it, you can't feel it or touch it. You can, but we don't think about that. It's not an object, right? One of the people that started, and this is how recent it is, Ed Schein only started in the 80s to talk about culture, organizational culture. We've thought about culture as anthropology, as societies, as, ethnic culture, whatever. Ed Schein began to talk about culture of organizations, and it was only, 25 years ago that actually happened. So these are the assumptions that we carry around with us, whether they're invented or discovered or developed by a group of people that cope with the problems of how we relate to the outside, and then also how do we organize ourselves inside. Those are the assumptions. So, another way to put it is how things get done around here, right? So if you think, I don't know, you could give yourself a moment here to say, in the organization you work in, what is the culture of your organization? It might be hard. Sometimes it takes an outsider to come in and notice what you have taken for granted that's unconscious or tacit that you have. So at Royal Roads, I can say one of the things about our culture as a university is that people work hard at Royal Roads. Other universities I've been at, there have been conscientious people and so on, but we have a dedicated, it's really quite amazing. I love it. We have people who are very, very dedicated to what they're doing, and there's not a lot of people sitting around kind of just unconsciously going through the day. But that's an outstanding feature. Think about what your organization's culture is. We've been also, since Ed Schein wrote his book, a whole bunch of other things came along. You know, and so we're starting to get into the conversation. Because if we aren't aware of how we do things automatically, if there's something wrong with it, we won't be able to get it. We won't be able to, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with it this year, but next year it doesn't work so well. So how do we get into digging underneath the what and the how to the why, and what motivates us? So here's some of the, some of the things this is Richard Barrett. We're going to talk a lot about his work. I want to introduce, there are 3 people I'm going to mention in this presentation that have done amazing things with very large multinational organizations. So are you hearing this okay? I'm not paying much attention to this. How about this, Dave? Are we okay? All right. So Richard Barrett, Sonia Stojanovic, who worked with a huge bank, ANZ Bank in Australia, over I think 33,000 people in like 55 countries. Tor Eneroth, who's up until recently been the manager of culture at IT Volvo in Sweden. Tom Boardman, who is the CEO of an equally large bank in South Africa. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what they're doing, and as an indication of what's possible and what we're learning and how it's actually making a difference in the world. That's the other thing I really like about Royal Roads, is I am so pleased to be working at a place that's actually doing something with knowledge, where there's actually a direct application. So what we're going to do is I want to start by us having a moment to think about our own values, and then I'm going to talk about a way to think about values that I think you'll find helpful. And then we're going to look at changing cultures in workplaces with the examples, and then I want to end up with leadership. What has all this got to do with leadership? And one of the things is that it has absolutely and utterly everything critically to do with leadership. And then we'll talk about some resources that you may have that you may be interested in. So, what we do is based on the beliefs we have. You know, the very fact that you're here this evening suggests that you see education, and probably post BA education, as an important thing in the success of your work, in helping you to achieve what you want to achieve. That's a value. So think about values. We you know, talk about values, but we also do. The ones that make a huge difference are the ones that actually end up in our actions. And then the other part of it is that connects up with, you know, organizations that we're in. You know, in some ways, communities and how we've grown up make it better or worse for organizations to be successful. If we are conscientious, hardworking Canadians, it's a very different ballgame than, you know, kind of, you know, folks that are either not interested in their work or whatever. I think we're actually, as a culture in Canada, quite responsible and quite hardworking. We also have trust people to a certain extent. A way to think about this is, if you were starting a business and you had 2 choices, Canada or, let's say, Russia, or, you know, where would you choose? You know, there's a culture that makes work and accomplishment possible. And of course, what's wonderful about our world is that's all beginning to come together. We influence the values of one country, also spill over to others. Here's a little thing I'd like you to do, and to kind of get into this, and that is to take a piece of paper, and I think there's some lying around here in the form of Marriott notes, and make a 2x3 table. So, or is it a 3x3 table? Anyway, what you want is something that looks like this, where you have values in one column, the value. I'm going to ask you to choose maybe 2 or 3 values that you think describe you. And then say, what is the belief that relates to that value that you have? And then, how does it show up? You know, what would be some signs in your behavior about that? How would it show up? So what do you do? So here's one that I have is courage. One of the reasons I think that, and courage is, what courage is to me, to do the right thing, even if it's scary or dangerous. That's what takes courage. And one example would be speaking the truth to power, where, you know, instead of talking behind the boss's back, letting him or her know that you have some issues that may get in, that are related to the work. Okay? Makes sense? So let me ask you to get into pairs eventually and share your values, talk about your values. But first of all, just take about 2 or 3 minutes and say, what are some of the values that float up for you? As an example, it's something you might want to continue to do at home, but just what pops into your mind as values that you think are yours. And I'll ask you then to, let's take it's, let's say take 10 minutes. Would that be okay? I hate to interrupt this. I hate it. This is one of the worst parts of teaching, interrupting good conversation. Actually, one of the things that Jason Fried says is that managers, he calls it the M&M thing in the workplace. The reason things don't get done in the workplace is the M&M. The managers and the meetings. Managers keep interrupting you and calling meetings. So it interferes with getting your work done. Anyway, so here I am interrupting you. What happened there? Was that, how did you find that?
Difficult.
Difficult. Okay. What? You mean getting at something that really?
To isolate them, I think. Mine
Yeah.
all kept going.
Right.
It was like, well, it's integrity, but it's honest, and then
Right.
and it all blended.
Yes.
It was difficult
Right.
to separate
Okay.
a value.
Okay. You know, I'm going to be writing something shortly called Values Fluency. Because when we talk about values, we think it's going to be easy. We think it's going to be easy, but in actual fact, we don't have a habit of talking about values. And then bringing those into the workplace and actually saying, so what do we do with that? How about other thoughts, observations? Yes, thank you.
I thought it was a good tool to talk to the people that were
Yes.
sitting beside me.
Yes. You get to know people. You know, I'm making an assumption here, but that when you talk about what people care about, what matters most to them, it's a very significant conversation. Yeah. Yes.
I just wanted to add that I chose honesty and I got stuck on it. And my belief about it is that it's being open and vulnerable. So that would come into that too.
Yes.
So you are open to yourselves up and being open.
Right.
I was going to say, actually, I also picked honesty and I moved on to another one. Because in the workplace, I think that's an issue. I don't think we are honest in the workplace.
Yes.
So I tried to find another value that I could actually work with a bit more easily.
So Amanda, the interesting thing here is, and this is what I want us to think about tonight, is can we take our values to the workplace? You know, the things that matter most to us is going to be what we're going to have joyful energy for. Our workplaces need our joyful energy, our commitment. But are they getting it, and do we know how to create places for people that work that way? So that is the challenge, and I'm suggesting that this is the challenge of our century. You know, if you think about the issues of climate change and you know, economic turmoil and tumult, and you know, the challenges of a shrinking planet and people ethnically not getting along well with one another, actually underneath all that are culture and values. So, and leadership that can take a grip, you know, and work with it. So how do we bring values and culture into a practical frame so actually we can do something about it? And we're beginning to do that. So I'm going to offer you tonight one way to do that, one way that we found helpful. And I want you to, and we'll come back to your values as we go. Richard Barrett wrote 3 books, or he's actually written more than that, but there are 3 books here, and you can, as I said, if you leave me your card, I can give you this and you can see the titles and so on. But I think what he's done is he's taken a way to take the most important things to us and bring it into a way of looking at it, a way of talking about it, a way of working with it in a workplace that's easy. Well, it's not easy, but it's accessible, it's doable. You know, values to some extent are like these beautiful, you know, when you're a kid, blowing bubbles. That big bubble with all those colors you could see, and then all of a sudden it disappears. There's something about that values are like too. They're really important, but you know, all of a sudden, how do we work with it? What he's done is he's taken. How many people know about Abraham Maslow's stuff? Yeah, okay, most of us in our culture do. And so Maslow talked about different priorities of needs, from the physiologial safety, you know, and when we satisfy those, we can go on to working on belonging. And when we are part of a tribe, we're able then to begin to think about who we are to ourselves and our sense of ourselves, and then a self-actualization, you know, moving into becoming who we're meant to be. What Richard has done is taken that schema and he's pulled it over into talking about consciousness. If you think about needs are the things that very often drive. It is what we chase, what we think is important. So if in fact we have a need for freedom, like those folks in Egypt, boy, that will drive us. It's a value that will drive behavior, right? And if so what he's done is, he's taken this as here, I'll flip it over here. The first one is survival. You know, we all have needs for survival, and and physical safety. But now here's the brilliance. The brilliance is with different levels of needs apply to different values. So on a personal level, when we're thinking about health and financial stability, we're thinking about our survival. Those are drivers. They're important. I don't spend as much time on my health, but I'm working on it. The other thing about it is that we can get obsessed and frightened, and those values can become limiting. You know, worrying about job insecurity all the time can start draining good things out of the system for us. And but the other thing that's brilliant about this is that he also applies it to organizations. So in an organization, if we're concerned about survival, it's all about profit, shareholder value, you know, employee health and safety. Those are all organizational values that you could say are about survival. And similarly, we can get obsessed. The kind of person who becomes so worried about profit and financial stability becomes a very controlling person, a leader who will, you know, be very controlling because they're frightened. This is driven by fear. All these red things are, you know, we're driven by fear. There's nothing wrong with survival, but when we get frightened, it goes crazy. So in the same way, we can think about it at a national or community level. We can say, what are the values? Well, economic stability, safety, you know, police departments and emergencies and so on, and hospitals are all about all these kinds of things. And it can go wonky. It could also go into corruption. There are many. We're very fortunate in this country to we have our corruption, but we don't have it in the huge dose that, for example, my friend from from Ecuador.
Berlusconi.
Hey?
Berlusconi.
That's right, from Italy. Right, here's Italy. That's it, exactly right. You know, but I actually met a guy who's come here because he was kidnapped. He was a leader of a large organization that was kidnapped in Ecuador. So, you know, it's kind of like, holy cow, and poverty, of course, is another piece of it. So that's one way to think about values. I'm going to motor through the rest of these, but while I'm doing this, maybe you could think about the values you chose and think about what level they're on here, okay? So, relationship. When we're focused on, you know, where do we fit? You know, who's our family, who's our friends? We can become concerned about that and become, you know, worried about being liked and so on. But, you know, we're focused on the drive to relate. Similarly, in an organization, organization's, you know, one of the things at Royal Roads that was a value, we did a cultural values assessment that went across every part of the university and every employee group, was customer and student satisfaction. And as a result, because we all share that, we have enormously wonderful ratings on our you know, student ratings in Maclean's, for example, in these surveys and so on. Ipsos read, you know, the way students think of us, because we're working on it. What we value, we do. So we are also, so open communication and respect. Respect is the whole business of I acknowledge you, you belong here, I have respect for you as a fellow human being and a person in my workplace. It can also go wrong. You know, there are many workplaces some of you have had experience with toxic workplaces where instead of taking responsibility, we got people blaming other people. And when that comes down the line, it will drive other people to do the same. If you've got a boss who's anxious and not trusting and prone to blame when something goes wrong rather than ask questions, begin to blame people, that will get thrown around, that will circulate through your organization. Same thing in community, in national and communities, the whole thing about, you know, intergroup conflicts. You know, we think about the fact we live in a fairly peaceful time. We actually don't. Aaron Apadurai is a guy who talks about how so much change in the world is upsetting a lot of different groups of people in some parts of the world, and they end up taking it out on other people. You know, we hear about, you know, Sudan or, you know, but that's not the only place, and that we're having troubles. So what happens then is discrimination and victimization. It's easy for people to explain that it's not something wrong with my community, it's something wrong with a few people in it. And if we just got rid of them, it'll be all better. Well, we've gone through that, we don't want to go through it again. Self-esteem, how does that work? Well, you know, when we're concerned about success or self-confidence, we can, as a person, organizations are concerned about efficiency and quality and productivity. That's all very important. Those are values at that level. Well, these things can go wrong too. So in an organization, you can be so worried about productivity that you try to control it with your over business engineering stuff and become very bureaucratic, and it starts to turn around on you and bite you. There's also at the national level, we value the rule of law in Canada, and it even shows up in our banking industry, thank the Lord. That's really important to us. Government efficiency is something else that's valued, that would be a productivity of the nation. So, and again, that can also go wrong. Innovation, so then we get into Maslow's self-actualization. The first level is even thinking about change at all. You know, being open, for example, to to growth and change and continuous learning, and in an organization, innovation, teamwork, so on. That's all processes of keeping things moving along. And democracy itself is about reaching beyond where we are and hearing from everyone and so on, and being adaptable. In organizational, then we move on to what is internal coherence or cohesion, which is, for a person, is our capacity to trust ourselves, to know what we're doing. Our values, a values-driven life is a business of saying there is coherence, I know what I'm about, and this is where I'm going, and being able to be creative with that. Same thing with organizations, integrity. Values-driven organizations are organizations, in fact, the actual focus on culture in an organization is one that says we need organizational coherence. It's values-driven, not rules-driven. If you were rules-driven, you'd be down here. Okay, so what it means is that, in actual fact, you've heard the phrase, we hire attitude and build skill. Well, it's really hiring values. People who care about the same things are going to figure out how to work together without having to control each other. And controlling each other usually takes a lot out of the place. Making a difference is the next one. You know, what organizations, I was over at Leadership Victoria before coming here, and I looked at a lot of our community's organizations that care about its community. People who have sponsored leadership, civic and community leadership. That would be, and building other people's capacity within an organization. So here we have organizational satisfaction. Here we would have organizational employee engagement, because people are truly, genuinely committed to what they're doing and engaged. And here we'd have employee fulfillment. I care about my employees, not just to do the job, but to become that person that they could be. So you see there's a quite different shift in consciousness that goes on. And then service. Living a life of service, the servant leader. How many people have heard of Robert Greenleaf, the servant leader, whose real job is to just, do what you can to help others in their lives and their work. So values here are wisdom, compassion. We have respect here, but we have compassion here. So it's not just about, it's a different level. For an organization, it's all about social responsibility in the long-term perspective. And for a nation, it's about future generations. To what extent are we functioning in a way that cares, like as the Aboriginal folks tended to do, thinking 7 generations ahead, not next week or the next quarterly report. So it's a different world with different consciousness. So what we have here is self-interest, which is very important, and we have transformation. How do we become more than what we are? And here is all about common good. Now, if you have a critical mass of people thinking about what's good for the organization, not subverting their own self-interest, but what's good for the organization, that's going to be a place that's going to thrive. Same thing with a nation, community, right? Make sense? So what's interesting here is that how many people saw their values somewhere in here? Okay, do you remember what levels? I can just, what levels they were? Honesty came up here. We did a national values assessment you can get from our website. The top value in Canada, almost half the respondents, and it was a representative sample, chose honesty. Canadians are big on honesty. So honesty is right here, okay? And what happens is that you can take, well, I'll show you in a minute here. So how about other people? How many have
Compassion.
compassion? So compassion is up here.
The integrity with wisdom or
Integrity is also, I think, up here. Or it might be here too. Honesty for sure is there. Yeah. Equality. So that's here. It's, you know, opening up to other people and making sure that everybody has a say. Everybody has influence. Other things.
Accountability.
What is that?
Accountability.
Accountability. Accountability is also here because it says that I'm going to take accountability and responsibility are here. That I'm going to take what happened to what I did is asking a question of how did that go, and it's then engaged. Then it engages us in looking at learning, potentially how to do it better the next time, or being able to be happy that we did it well that time. Okay, so what is interesting across nations, we're beginning to gather data on this, and it turns out that there's a huge level here of values. And my thinking, and what's interesting is that when we talk about management and old ways of doing leadership, we're talking about the first 3 levels of this. We're not talking, and so there's been a shift in thinking about leadership, and it's probably coming about because we've got lots of educated people, lots of people who have decent expectations about a decent life, and who also are capable of autonomy. This pattern is something that Environics has picked up in their social value surveys over the last 26 years in Canada, that we've moved away from authority-driven to more autonomous, responsible, ideal-seeking people. That's the way it's going. So those are the people who are in the workplace. That means that if we're going to be great leaders, we have to relate to those people. And it means that we, so I'll come back to that in a minute, but what I kept on thinking was those folks in Egypt were saying, no more of this, even if it's good. The fact is we want to have freedom, and we want it to be a broad-based thing, right? So there's a shift. You can see it happening in the news. I find it fascinating. Yeah.
So I just missed your, you said we moved from authoritative to
authoritarian or directive, yeah.
To more autonomous.
A more autonomous, yes. So for example, in your workplace,
right,
as a leader, your employees are going to we are as employees going to light up and get very excited when in fact we're on track to what matters to us, and where we're trusted by leaders to do our job and to communicate well and openly about it so we can keep going. And if we're able to do that, we're going to be a very adaptable, flexible organization. Those are the possibilities here. Okay? The best organizations are ones that are stretched across here. There's none of these levels are perfect. The fact is we have all these things are at play. Richard calls it full spectrum functioning. That's for my life too. And I can tell you that I've pretty much ignored this down here, so now you know you have to get into your taxes and your planning, and are you going to put the RSP and all that sort of stuff. So if we don't think about culture, we have culture, but it's a default culture. It's one that we fell into, and it's one that probably we can't even describe. And it's often likely to be something that's going to have to do with a lot of limiting values, a lot of things we're not even conscious that we're creating. So, what's cultural entropy? Entropy is lost energy. It's waste. It's unproductive. It's frustration, and it's think about your day to day, and think about how much of the time you might have been wasting because you were waiting on somebody else, or that you were worried because there was some kind of problem or whatever. Okay, so the big thing is cultural entropy in an organization costs a lot of money. Here is the energy available for an organization in doing work. It's the energy that you and I bring to work, plus then minus the amount of energy that it takes to do our job. If you add a new project, you're going to have more energy, right? But there's also the possibility that you have cultural entropy, and there's a whole bunch of wasted time that goes on. Now, what's also interesting is sometimes we have workplaces that actually get us so excited, we create energy, right? So actually, we're getting to the point of where we are going to be able to measure some of this stuff. So hold on to your seats here. So you can say to people, you can say, just like we did tonight, what are your values? Who are you? What's most important to you? That's hugely important to an organization because it's going to be those things that are going to light you up and that are going to bring you into a workplace and add energy, in fact, when you're able to deal with it, express it. Then you can say, what is the culture as it is now? What are the behaviors and values that characterize this workplace? And then you can say, what are the behaviors and values? And behaviors, by the way, are values because even though we might not say what I really want to be here is controlling. We don't say that. But we are controlling and we keep doing it and we keep doing it. There's something, we're valuing something, we're believing something and valuing something that drives that. So who are we? What's our workplace like? And how rather would we want it to be? You can actually, there's an electronic way to do this. You're asked to select values out of a whole huge list in terms of what are your values. Now in an organization, this is a little organization, there's honesty at the top. The most frequently you can say, and again, that's about half the people. So frequently occurring values, these are the top 10. And they would have, they could have, the other in the list, there's another 75 values they could have chosen, right? So you can get a sense of who we are, what as a group we value. What do we care about? Well, if people are going to be able to be honest and have something they can be committed to and be accountable, adaptable, and so on, that's a workplace that draws on what's already really important to you and what really you think is valuable. Then you can say, what's the current workplace like? So the blue dots are all positive. The white dots are potentially limiting. So if we look, blame, this company, 27 out of 53 people said blame was a characteristic. And long hours. Now, where does blame belong? It belongs here. Long hours, there is profit, so that's a good thing. It's a bottom line thing. Control is a negative or limiting thing down here. Cost reduction is seen to be positive. If it's overdone, I think it could get negative. Anyway, do you see how this is working? You can say, what do our employees think about this workplace? Now this zeroes in on what you can do about the culture. What can we do about a culture of blame? What do we need to do here? Now there are no answers here that you're going to get, okay, do the following things, 1, 2, 3. You're going to have to, as employees, you're going to have to, and leaders, you're going to have to think about how we're going to do this. And yes?
I was just going to ask you, wouldn't spin out of that, you'd have to have a big focus on conflict resolution? I would presume if you think all these values come forward, i.e. your first pile of attributes there.
Well, actually, what's interesting is whether it's in organizations or countries, people find a lot of common ground. There's a release and there's a people begin to see that they actually are sharing the same experience and didn't know it. So yes, there's going to be differences, but there's also a common ground for a conversation. Okay? And then where do we want to go? Well, we care about our customers. We want to be accountable. We want continuous improvement, accountability. There's a lot up here. So not only what the values are, but where they are going. This is a pretty good stretch across that full spectrum. So that's a little example. I'm gonna. So the other thing is you get a readout on entropy. Entropy, 41% entropy. That's huge. That means. So let's say that you have to have, say, 15%. No organization is going to be able to be perfect, right? But you could say 15% minus 41 is 26%. And if you take 26% of your salaries and benefits budget, that's how much money is being wasted in your organization, right? And it tells you where this entropy is. This is all about organizational dysfunction, but there's also significant down here. This instrument's been used in 2,000 organizations, roughly, mostly in Europe and Africa, some in in North America, South America, some in Asia. So it's been very successful actually as a way to get at culture. It's probably the most, there's another, yeah, it's probably one of the most prevalent. You know, over 250,000 people have filled it out. Actually, the largest company was China Mobile, 87,000 people filled it out. And by the way, it's in, I don't know, 12 or 15 languages, so it's sort of interesting. So what do we know about then, if we can get on to culture, if we say entropy here, how does it relate? Well, it turns out the best employers in Barrett and Hewitt, the employee engagement people, did some comparisons in Australian companies, I think 163 organizations, and they found out that, of course, it's not surprising, when you have 21% entropy, you have a rather low level, less than half employee engagement. And as you go up, reduce the entropy, the engagement doubles now. So maybe that's not a surprise, but what has this got to do with the bottom line, right? Actually, oh, here's another one. Here's where there was a misalignment of culture and people and engagement. You can see actually that it follows, and this is the same study, only it's put in a graphical form. You can see how it sort of flows. Those are things that are related. Those two features of an organization are related. And financial returns, okay. An engaged workforce makes a huge difference, because with less than 10% entropy, there was the growth percentage of growth a year in the bottom line is over 30%. Growth, the percentage of growth. So it makes a huge difference. Here's a whole different group. This is not Barrett. This is people in California, and they're finding the same thing. Earnings before interest and taxes compared to agreement whether the corporate culture is positive to them. Well, you see it sort of tracks, right? Here's the S&P 500 average, and when you took the best employees to work for, suddenly their return year over year is nearly 17%. So how do we forget that people are a part of the equation in producing profit and productivity? Somehow we do. So cultural alignment and cultural entropy are things that underlie employee engagement level and performance. This guy, he's a great guy. He worked over 10 years with this, and what you do is you do this every year, or you do it every second year, and you say, we did some things to fix that, what happened? So he says culture, structure, strategy, this is what we have to work with. Most of the time we're working here, and some of the time we're working here, but rarely we work here. So here's the story. Employee satisfaction over the last 5 years at Volvo IT was over 90%. Customer satisfaction was improved 30%. Delivery precision, that's their productivity rating, went from almost doubled. And to be an attractive employee was what that particular part of Volvo thought of themselves. Tom Boardman in South Africa worked with this, and you can see how if you work on some of these things that happen in 1 year, you can improve the positives and you can reduce the negatives. And so what did that do? That's the entropy went from 25 to 9% in just 1 year. Here's what happened. Return on equity, less than 1% in 2003. This was a bankrupting, going in the ditch organization, to 50.5% 2 years later. Now, he didn't just work on culture, he worked on finance, he worked on the whole picture, but the fact is, without the cultural piece, he would say, here's what happened overall. You can see that the yellow line is 2005 and the green line is 2006, so you can see improvement on almost everything, except ethics. Probably the banking group have to keep that standard anyway. In ANZ, there were deficits, lousy share price, and bank bashing. The employees at ANZ didn't even like to say that they worked there. Then they began to, when they made this shift, they began to post record earnings and build a performance organization and develop a different culture. That's how they did it. One that could perform, grow, and break out. Here's some metrics. This is net profit after taxes. You can see how it moves up over time, and the cost of the cost of doing business to the compared to the income dropped. So the cost dropped against the income level. So hugely, quite significantly over 10 years. And here's the stock price. And it's almost tripled, right? Here's the customer satisfaction thing, where they started working. This is ANZ Bank here. No, is it ANZ Bank? Yes. And peer banks and regional banks. So regional banks do better. Our credit unions are often better. Here's the satisfaction, employee satisfaction, and employee engagement, which moved significantly here too. So I want you to listen a little bit to this gal, Sonia, who did who was the consultant to the chief executive officer, talking about
the thing was that,
leadership
plan, and it was an integrated plan, addressing and attacking all aspects that need to be addressed, and we were opportunistic. Always on the lookout for the good story, for the inspirational story. And I remember one day after ANZ had just announced a $3.6 billion profit, a pensioner came into one of our branches, and we had TV screens up on the wall, and John was speaking to the analysts, and it was being broadcast through ANZ so that the people could see it. And the pensioner came in with her pension check, and she said, "It's absolutely disgraceful, so many profits, and here are me living on my poor little pension." And the woman, who was a part-time person in the telling booth, said, "Yes," and I'm going to swear here, so excuse me. She said, "Yes, I know. These bankers are all a bunch of bastards. And I only work here because I need the money for my kids to put them through school. And if I could get another job, I'd be out of here tomorrow. I am really, really sorry." Anyway, the pensioner went off, and this person was so annoyed with this. She wrote an email to John. John had his own email box. People used to write to him. He answered everybody's email. And she wrote, and she told him this story. And he was so moved by this that he then went back to her and he said, "We're going to cancel all banking fees for people over 60. The head of personal banking almost had a heart attack because there are a lot of millionaires who are over 60. And John said, "I don't care. This is a principle, and I'm working for, the ordinary Australian, even though I'm not Australian." And so that's what happened. And of course it was in the papers. He got 15,000 emails thanking him. Not from outside the bank, but from staff, from the world over, as this went out. So, we never know. Things that happen opportunistically, things that happen just as a matter of serendipity or synchronicity, can have the biggest impact. And I remember a second story when the National Australia Bank, which was the biggest bank, decided to sell off 56 branches in the bush. The bush is a bit like internal Canada, right? Not many people travel for miles. So, their bank is really important to them. They were selling off 56, so closing down 56 branches actually, and putting the banking into post offices. And John decided that he wanted to buy them. So he rang up the head of the National Australia Bank and said, "Look, I'll buy these from you." And the guy said, "No way." And so John called a press conference and said, "I'm making a public announcement that ANZ is willing to buy these branches." And of course, the whole place went wild. you know, people were walking around going, we're so proud of you, we're so proud to be part of ANZ, that John's taken the stand for the Australians in the bush, and, and this was like, 15 months down the track. What a different place already, just by a couple of really strong symbolic actions.
That's actually my segue to saying, what does this got to do with leadership? Well, everything. So, actually, the culture is very much a reflection of the people in it, and especially those who are especially influential. And so the question is for a leader to say, who am I? What are my values here? What are going to be driving me? What's my purpose? And also, how does this communicate in my behavior? This guy went with what he valued, what he said he was about, and he lit the sky up. So we have a way to think about who we are, our character, and how that shows up in our behavior, create an authentic leader that really hugely inspires and is credible. And so what's that got to do with organizations? Well, we have to engage others in what's the organization's mission, build it out of what people value and how we do things, what's the desired future. And so then we have a potential of using that authenticity to create an influence and a change in culture. And everybody gets into the act and also builds cohesion in the organization and a capacity for action. I could also say a capacity to adapt. We can let go of a lot of fears, and therefore we can be willing to change more quickly. So you can see how this sort of gathers momentum. There are many different kinds of leaders. The kinds that I think most of the programs that Rural Roads does is that we create certainly people who can organize, but also who can influence without orders, and inspire. That's I think probably most of our leadership programs take people from here to here. Influence goes nations, communities, workplaces. We talked about that a little bit before in personal values. Our institute's all about trying to create knowledge that tells us something about what we value in communities and how to build. We're currently working with Spain, Sweden, Iceland, people who are doing these kinds of community values assessments and trying to build stronger, more communicative communities, adaptable. We're also about education. There's a little folder back there about values-based leadership. Thanks, Diane. It's the smallest one, so it stands out. And that will have the certification within it for the Barrett certification to actually use this tool. But more than that, it is a program that will build, for leaders, focus on our own internal cohesion, strengthen us for the high winds, and also enable us to bring values into a way to work with organizations and teams. That also transfers credits into the MBA and MA leadership, and also the whole thing transfers into the MA for interdisciplinary studies. We also have a professional development workshop which we take into organizations, Diane is a coordinator of the Institute here. She is going to tell us when the online personal values identification life manual is going to be going. Is that next week?
Next week.
Okay. And the other thing is we're going to have instrumented, you can do the individual values assessment and get coaching eventually to us. Keep me informed if you're interested in that. It will be accessible online too. And we also provide services to organizations. We do cultural values assessments, and we work with organizations to get a hold of the cultural challenges that they face, and executive team development. We also do thought forums, gather people, share thoughts, build networks for this kind of work. And that's us. So and Diane has told me that we have a LinkedIn site. Just go to Rural Roads University, how you got to the place in the first place. And there's a LinkedIn thing, and I'll be watching. If you want to follow up with this, I'd be happy to chat with you over that. And I've got a whole bunch of cards here if you want to call or whatever. Actually, so stop. We're over time. I'm sorry, it's been a sort of a jam-packed evening. How was that for you? What sense does it make to you? I feel entirely encouraged by this work. I've been at this for 30 years, and I keep seeing things we try going the way of the dodo bird all the time. And I really, really believe that this is a much more reasonable and wise way to think about making our workplaces and our communities better places to be. Any questions? Comments? If not, it's been a pleasure being here. Hopefully see you around.